ensuring our descendants have the means to return to greatness!
Hello guys, and welcome to another video. The Necropolis content reveal is just over a week away, and so I thought it'd be fun to dive into some predictions for the buffs and nerfs that we're likely to see in patch 3.24. So let's get straight into it, beginning with the nerfs. And number one on the nerf list, which should be number one on everybody's nerf list, is Penance Brand of Dissipation, of course, which is the most overtuned and broken skill that's been in the game for a long time. Now, this skill, like many of the new transfigured gems, were probably not tested thoroughly before getting added to the game, and it's just completely overtuned. It does way too much damage. And I think this one won't just get a normal nerf, it will get a classic GGG triple nerf. It's probably going to get its base damage nerfed, the cast speed nerfed, and then the more damage multiplier will probably be nerfed as well. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised to see this skill dealing 70 or 80% less damage in the next patch. This one is going to get absolutely gutted. And number two on the predictions for nerfs is Detonate Dead. Not that one though, nope. I don't think Player Detonate Dead is going to be nerfed. I think Monster Detonate Dead is going to be nerfed. In the Affliction League, we saw some pretty unfortunate player deaths. I know that Quinn69 had 2 deaths in the Wildwood mechanic, both to Detonate Dead or some kind of corpse explosion mechanic. And to be honest, this league was kind of plagued with those kind of deaths, with lots and lots of rip clips of similar types. But this is just one league in many, and Detonate Dead from monsters has been a problem for a very long time. But this is a bit less of a prediction and a bit more of a spoiler, because we actually had the Tavern Talk podcast back at the start of January. And in that podcast, Darth Microtransactions actually asked a question revolving around player deaths that are unrecognizable, and he was referring to a recent death that he had to Detonate Dead, and the fact that Detonate Dead is often very dangerous and not very visible. And Jonathan and Mark had this to say.
So there are a couple of things there I will say in particular. One is that, just to be completely clear about this, the way Detonate Dead is in PoE 1 isn't good, and Mark has a specific plan. I think he's even going to change it in PoE 1 before too long, which I don't know if you're happy to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you got 2 corpses on the ground, and they look like they're just 2 different bodies, and you don't know the life of those bodies on the ground, especially with the current just AoEing things down. And it is always bad for something like one of those things might deal 1,000,000 damage and the other might deal 100 damage, and you don't know. And so the problem with Detonate Dead right now is, yes, you cannot, I mean, aside from the fact 1,000,000 damage is probably unacceptable outside of the context of some bosses. You can't tell which of those is going to deal more damage. So we need to make sure that Detonate Dead, and I've spoken to other designers about this, and the tasks have been made to change this. There is a clear difference in telegraphing, or at least danger. Like, you can see this thing is going to do a lot of damage, and this thing is going to do a small amount of damage before that damage is dealt. Whereas right now, both look identical. So if you take like Alira's DD, for example, or like Malagiro's, you've just got the exact same telegraphing on every corpse and the exact same timing on every corpse, and yet one of those corpses might deal 100 times the damage of another, and you just don't know.
So you were saying about having like red flashes was like beep, 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 getting stronger and stronger, and then the amount of time that it takes is longer when the corpse has more life. So you've got more time to get out of the way the larger the corpse is. So you kind of get this, like, the telegraph actually changes based on the amount of life in the corpse.
Yeah.
And that way, Detonate Dead will be more visibly easier to understand. You'll be able to dodge it when it matters and this kind of stuff.
You should see it and go, that will kill me, and that will not, probably won't kill me.
So based on this information, I think that Monster Detonate Dead is going to be nerfed. Whether it gets nerfed in 3.24 or not, we'll have to wait and see, but I do think that's going to be a high priority on the list of things to be changed, so I definitely expect to see it in this patch. And number 3 on the list of nerfs is Defiance of Destiny and Radakesh's Impatience. Those 2 uniques are very, very strong, and they got used a ton in this league by lots and lots of builds. But I don't think they're going to be nerfed mechanically. I don't think we're going to see any kind of tweaks to the numbers on those items. I actually think both of them are going to be moved from the Tier 1 rarity to Tier 0 unique rarity, and that means they're going to be a lot less common and a lot more expensive in Trade League. And I think that makes sense. I'm not really sure why Defiance of Destiny made it into Tier 1 rather than Tier 0 to begin with, but don't expect to see this in the patch notes. That will be something that will have to be discovered by the players into the next league. Now let's move on to the buff predictions, beginning with Ascendancy reworks. Surely Gladiator is going to be reworked in this patch. I have said this before, I could also see Assassin, Raider or Berserker getting a rework as well. Those are the classes that are most in need of reworks. But I'm a little bit unsure on this one, I have to say, because we had 2 Ascendancy reworks in Crucible, and then we had the information come out from Chris Wilson during the Q&A from Crucible that they had actually been working on many Ascendancy reworks in the background, and they had done a bunch of them for Ruthless mode, and they were going to ship all of those changes, but they kind of pulled back on them because they didn't want the negative response to Ruthless changes. So they said they had a bunch of Ascendancy reworks in the pipeline that they weren't quite happy with, and so they were going to ship them out at a later date. We then got another 2 in Trial of the Ancestors, but then in Affliction we had no Ascendancy reworks, which makes me think that perhaps they're going to hold off on those for now, but I'm hopeful that we're going to see some of those Ascendancy reworks in this patch, even if it's only 1. Surely it's the Gladiator. Please rework the Gladiator. It needs desperate help. And prediction number 2 for the buffs is Blood Magic. Now, Blood Magic was on my list for the buff predictions for 3.23 Affliction, and in a way we did get a buff to Blood Magic in that league because we had the Warlock Ascendancy with the Sanguimancy branch, which just added a bunch of utility to Blood Magic. And I said from the beginning that I thought that was a test for potential new additions to the core game for Blood Magic, and I still think that's a thing. So I expect to see buffs to Blood Magic in 3.24 in the form of some of those traits from the Sanguimancy branch going into the core game, and perhaps we could see things like the Life Reservation Efficiency going onto the Blood Magic Keystone, and maybe things like the Crimson Power node, for example, that could go behind Blood Magic, or different aspects of it could go behind Blood Magic just to flesh out the archetype a little bit more, because it's still a bit weak right now and I think it could have a lot more going for it. Blood Magic has been in this weird spot for a while where it has to compete with builds that reserve all of their mana against auras, and with auras being in such a powerful spot, it has a tough job doing that, so it needs more utility and more uniqueness about it, and these types of things being added to the core game would go a long way to achieving that. And buff prediction number 3 is Bleed. Yes, the bleeding ailment, I think it's going to get buffed in 3.24. It has been in a dire place for a while. Melee bleed in particular is in a terrible position. Of course, this could be changed in a big way if Gladiator gets a rework and gets a lot of interesting new tools to use with bleed. But I think overall, bleed kind of needs a bit of an adjustment. We had the Ignite change to the calculation in 3.16, and ever since that happened, Ignite has been a solid meta archetype, and Bleed kind of needs a similar thing. I think it needs probably a bit of an adjustment with the calculation, maybe even an adjustment to how it works. And it also needs more utility. Bleed desperately needs more interactions going on with it on the passive tree, on items, on ascendancies. I spoke about this in a previous video. Bleed has just 2 passive skill tree wheels on the passive skill tree, compared to the 5 or 6 of Ignite. And Bleed could also do with things like, for example, the Ensnaring Arrow debuff, which makes enemies count as moving. We need access to that on melee. So there's plenty of things that could happen to Bleed, and I'm hopeful that we'll get some of those in 3.24. What about you? What do you see being nerfed and buffed in patch 3.24? Let me know in the comment section below. Perhaps I'm completely wrong with these, or perhaps you agree with me on some of them. And a big shout out to my supporters over on Patreon. Thank you for your support. If you want to support the growth of this channel, consider becoming a patron. The link is in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.